High in the rugged mountains, a young man dragged his feet, his breathing ragged under the crushing weight of a large pack on his back. He followed a band of adventurers, sweat running down his face. One of the men groaned that they still hadn't found a single rockbird egg. The group's dark-haired leader frowned in irritation, questioning why nobles were so obsessed with such eggs in the first place. Rockbirds were rare, eagle-like monsters, strong flyers, and deadly in combat, making their eggs nearly impossible to obtain. Days earlier, the group had met with a wealthy noble who promised an outrageous reward if they could deliver a rockbird egg. Hayes, the guild master of Black Thunder, had accepted on the spot, flashing a confident grin. Among those present had been Udo Drigg, the same young man now carrying their gear. Udo had left his quiet countryside life dreaming of adventure in the royal capital. Rejected by other guilds, he had begged Hayes to take him in. Black Thunder agreed, but Udo quickly learned they had no intention of training him. He was there to carry luggage and do chores. 2 years passed that way, and still, he was nothing more than a pack mule. As they climbed the rocky trail, a party member sneered that Udo was dripping sweat everywhere. A girl in the group ordered him not to ruin the supplies, or he'd have to pay for them. Udo bit back his frustration and apologized, silently wondering why he had ever joined Black Thunder at all. Then someone spotted an egg high up on a cliffside. Hayes' expression lit up. This was their prize. Without hesitation, he ordered Udo to climb and retrieve it. Udo hesitated, nervously pointing out the danger, but Hayes brushed him off, saying Udo was the most expendable if something attacked. Swallowing his fear, Udo began climbing. His hands shook as he scaled the cliff, but he finally reached the egg. Its shell had an odd pattern, but Hayes shouted at him to hurry, leaving him no time to think. Udo carefully made his way down and handed it over. Hayes grinned and declared they'd be celebrating tonight. Udo, however, couldn't stay quiet. He said aloud that the egg shell didn't look like a rockbird's. It looked like a rock lizard's. The group glared at him in annoyance, and Hayes called him a killjoy. It's obviously a rockbird egg, Hayes said dismissively, before ordering everyone to head back. When they returned to the guild, the noble who had hired them exploded in rage. His experts had confirmed it was indeed a rock lizard egg, worthless to him. He swore never to hire Black Thunder again and threatened to report them to the Grandmaster. Hayes panicked, groveling and apologizing, desperate to avoid punishment. Then, suddenly, Hayes grabbed Udo and slammed him to the ground in front of the noble, blaming the entire failure on him. He claimed Udo had insisted it was a rockbird egg and that he had only been giving the boy a chance. Bleeding and stunned, Udo could barely comprehend what was happening. Hayes promised to fire him on the spot and begged the noble to forgive the guild. The noble agreed, but warned them he'd never hire them again. Once the noble was gone, Hayes' panic turned to fury. He announced to the whole guild that Udo was dismissed, blaming him for humiliating Black Thunder. Udo protested. He had served the guild faithfully for 2 years, but Hayes snarled that he was easily replaceable. Then he punched Udo in the stomach, tore the guild emblem from his license, and ordered him to leave the dorms at once. As he was thrown outside, someone hurled the egg at him, mocking that it was his severance pay. Lying in the dirt, Udo stared at the egg for a long moment before picking it up. "You've had a rough time too?" "Huh," he murmured softly. With a small, bitter smile, he decided he couldn't just abandon it. Hugging the egg close, Udo stood up. For the first time in years, he was free from Black Thunder, and something about this strange egg felt like the beginning of a new journey. Remember the rock lizard egg pattern correctly, so he decides to check on it the next day. He holds the egg closer to himself, comforted by its warmth. Before he knew it, sunlight was streaming in, through the windows. Well, I'll be damned. He really did forget. Did he sleep through the screaming? Udo blearily opens his eyes, surprised that it was already morning. He suddenly sits up, remembering that he had fallen asleep holding onto the egg. He checks on it immediately if it was. Okay, hoping he didn't crush it. It suddenly comes to mind that the egg hadn't cracked, even a little. But when it was thrown at him back in the guild, Udo starts to question if the egg wasn't even a rock lizard, but some new species of magical beast. However, he brushes the thought off immediately. Suddenly, a small crack appears on the shell. Udo places the egg down on the floor, panicking that he really did crush it. However, the egg was moving. More and more cracks start to appear on the wobbling egg. Not before long, a large crack opens, small claws gripping to the outer shell as whatever was inside came out. A small lizard-like creature with tiny wings fully escapes its eggshell. Udo stares at the creature, and it stares back quietly before throwing its tiny paws into the air with a toothy grin and sounds a greeting. Udo caws at its cuteness as the newborn monster stands. On its legs, it smiles at him once more, repeatedly making small noises. Excitedly wagging its tail, it jumps onto Udo's lap, much to the man's surprise and embarrassment. Examining the creature, Udo thinks how, although he had initially thought it was a rock lizard, the size seemed to be bigger, and more importantly, it had small wings. Maybe it was a subspecies. His thoughts are broken when someone loudly bangs on the door. It was the unknown owner roughly telling him it was checkout time, and if he was still there, he was getting charged a day extra. Udo reassures him that he is leaving, and the owner leaves him alone with a click of his tongue. The little monster frowns in annoyance at the disturbance. Udo apologizes to it, especially since it was just born, and asks it to stay in his pack for the meantime. The little creature agrees readily. They go back to town. Udo walks down the streets, carefully holding his bag with his new friend inside his arms. He starts to wonder what he was going to do from there, especially since the newborn monster seemed to recognize him as its parent from the moment it was born. He thought of raising it, but there was a problem. For an adventurer to walk around with a magical beast, a familiar contract through a guild was essential, and at that moment, Uto wasn't part of any guild, so he couldn't make the contract. If it was stolen, he couldn't even file a complaint. He decides that he needs to join a guild somewhere. Just then, his bag starts to squirm, and the little monster happily pops out with a chirp. How do you describe a little monster who goes coo all the time? Udo flusteredly asks for it to go back to the bag, but as he passes an alley, two shifty-looking men smirk in his direction. He keeps walking while thinking about what to do next. Joining an advanced guild like Black Thunder was impossible, especially given how he just happened to get in by luck, brother. You begged them to take you in and got abused for 2 years. Nothing about that was luck. Udo didn't accomplish anything while he was in Black Thunder, however, and so he remained in F rank. He wonders if he could get hired as labor in a mid-tier or weak guild. He continues to think deeply, not even noticing that the creature had poked its head out of his bag again. Udo only snaps out of his thoughts when he realizes that they had strayed quite far from the main street. Suddenly, two men start coming up behind him. One of them points out that he was holding something nice. Udo turns around to see two sneering faces looking down at his bag. They go on about how he was holding a rare magical beast that could maybe fetch a good price for being a rock lizard subspecies. They try to persuade him to hand over his bag. Udo realizes with horror that he was being robbed. He nervously tries to tell them that he couldn't, but the men brush his words off and sarcastically say that they were tight on money and ask him again to hand over the magical beast since he could just find another one. Udo thinks about his options, knowing that he couldn't just hand over the baby creature to the men. However, if they both attacked him, he wouldn't get away unscathed. The baby creature, oblivious to their situation, gives him a happy smile once more. Udo tightens his hold on the bag and resolutely says that he couldn't give it away because the child was already his magical beast. The men pause before the broader and taller one of them orders the other one to keep an eye out for people coming. When the other man leaves, the man left with Udo throws back his arm and delivers a punch right to Udo's face. He takes it at full force, a large bruise blooming on his face. He remains standing as he clings to the bag. The man orders him to hand over the bag again as he readies to hit him one more time. Yu grits his teeth. He looks the man dead in the eyes and refuses. The man is pissed with his response and brings out a short knife. He decided to take it by force. Brother, you've been forcing yourself to get the baby all this time. What are you talking about? The man lunges for Udo, knife ready. Udo squeezes his eyes shut and braces for getting stabbed, but the little creature pops up from his arms and faces the man. Opening its mouth, light starts to form from within. Uo stares in horror as flames burst from the baby's mouth. Given how close the man was, he takes the fire straight to the face, completely covering his body. Udo blinks in shock and disbelief at the happy baby monster in his arms. The man is completely fried and drops to the floor out cold. I'm amazed he's not dead considering he took that full force. Yu yells in disbelief, unable to tell where the fire came from. He turns to the baby and asks it if it was responsible, to which the little monster makes a sound of confirmation. Udo starts to break down what he knows. Rock lizards didn't breathe fire. With its extraordinary attack power, it was hard to think of it as just some subspecies. He slowly pieces his clues together. Its tough eggshell, the wings on its back, and now its flames. Yu was sure he had seen it in a book before. It was a magical beast far beyond a rock bird. Udo stares in horror at the happy little creature in his arms. It was a legendary dragon, just as Udo was still barely recovering from his shock that he was holding an actual legendary dragon, the Burnt Man's accomplice comes immediately back from guarding the entrance to the alley, seeing his ally on the ground. While the man was busy attending to him, Udo and the dragon slid by ever so slowly, trying, which is definitely some comfort. He might have been charged with murder. When they're far away enough, Udo immediately makes a break for it. Streets pass by them, and soon enough they find themselves hiding behind the wall of another building. Udo waited for a while, making sure that they weren't being chased. I don't think that's possible when the bigger one of them is burnt to a crisp. He holds out the dragon in front of him and praises it for taking the man down in one hit, making the dragon loud a proud chirp. However, their conversation is cut short when the dragon's stomach lets out a loud growl. Remembering that the dragon hadn't had anything to eat since it was born, Udo starts shifting around the bag and pulls out a dried piece of meat. He offers it to the dragon, who happily takes it. Watching it eat merrily, Udo thinks how a dragon was a bundle of rarity. So if any more bad guys found out its true identity, it would be in danger far beyond what they had just experienced. Having finished the piece of dried meat, the dragon smiles at him again, absolutely melting at its cuteness. Completely understandable, though. Udo holds the dragon close, resolutely decides to protect the baby dragon. He figured that they might be targeted again, so it would be better for them to stay indoors for the meantime. He looks for a place that might hire even someone like him, and eventually ends up in front of a rather gloomy and shifty-looking building. A sign in front says it was the hall for Quilt's guild. Stealing his nerves, he throws the doors open and gets in. The guild hall was as expected. Quests pinned to a board on the wall and tables for guild members to take a break in. Udo keeps observing the building, glad that it wasn't any different from a normal guild. Suddenly, a voice comes from in front of him. A girl at the front desk greets him to Quilt's guild. Her name was Quilt, master of the guild. Udo walks closer to the counter, and Quilt notices that he was injured. Time passes. Quilt had helped patch up his wounds behind the counter. Udo thanks her, but she brushes off his words, saying that it was the natural thing to do. She's already 1,000 times better than Hayes, I see. She asks for his name, and when he introduces himself, Quilt asks what was troubling him, much to Udo's surprise. Apparently, Quilt had seen him lurking around the entrance with a serious face. With a little push, Udo tells her his story about being kicked out of Black Thunder. Quilt ponders out loud how she hadn't heard anything good about Black Thunder and pieces together that he got his injuries from them, or at least most of them. Quilt immediately offers him to join the guild, much to Udo's surprise. Quilt reassures him that it was no problem. Rather, she asked that he join them, seeing as there was no one else there, and to be quite honest, they were shorthand on members. Udo admits that he thought that the place was closed. Quilt admits on her end that she wasn't quite good with people, and she started the guild herself, but she found being alone quite lonely. Quilt sheepishly admits that going back to the previous guild wasn't an option, so Uto reassures her that he understood. With that, he agrees to join Quilt's guild. Quilt happily offers to update his license card right away, but Udo suddenly cuts in, saying that there was one more thing he wanted to talk about, and that it was actually more important. He loosens the tie on his bag, and immediately the baby dragon pops its head out of the opening. Quilt immediately coos at the sight of it. The dragon immediately walks across the counter and nuzzles up to her, wagging its tail. She wonders if it's a rock lizard, but she sees that its color was different and it had wings. And with a start, she realizes that the little baby was a dragon. Looking at its features, Quilt was just as sure as Udo. She asks him where he found it. Petting its chin, Udo explains that its egg was the reason he got kicked out of Black Thunder. He thought the egg was a rock lizard too, and so they pushed the responsibility on him. Quilt wisely says that those who collected magical beasts and those who sought to make money in the end without love and knowledge, they would miss out on the important things. Quilt is amazed at the realization. She asks him what he wanted to do with the baby dragon, and he immediately says that he intended to make a familiar contract. Quilt explains that although the idea sounds easy, the dragon wasn't just any magical beast. Dragons were rare because they lived in remote areas without human presence. There was no way nobles wouldn't target such a legendary creature. There was also no guarantee that it would grow up to be well-behaved. If a dragon went on a rampage, it would cause massive damage. The baby dragon was both a precious and dangerous creature. Quilt asks him if he would be able to take responsibility should a time come anything happens. Udo pauses before curling his fists on his lap. He says that ever since he came to the royal capital, he hasn't had any good experiences. He's been treated terribly by various people. However, meeting the baby dragon and coming to Quilt's guild, he suddenly feels it all worth it. And so Udo pulls the baby dragon close to his chest and resolutely answers that if it ever harms people, he would absolutely atone for the crime. And to prevent that from ever happening, he would always stay by the baby's side. Quilt smiles at his answer. She agrees with his decision and decides to make the familiar contract right away. Yu is rather confused with the tension from earlier suddenly disappearing. Quilt winks at him, saying that it was only a test to understand his resolve, but she was reassured when his feelings came through quite clearly. Quilt asks if he's decided on a name now that Udo thought about it with everything that happened to them being kicked out of the guild and almost getting his newborn dragon stolen. He never got around to deciding on one. He mumbles to himself as he thinks before he stops. Udo comes to the decision to call it Rock Bro with all that thinking. That's the best you came up with. All right then. Rock chirps happily at the sound of its new name. Quilt agrees with the new name. She then asks Udo to put his right hand on the desk and for Rock to put its left front leg on top of Udo's hand. Quilt puts her hand over theirs and a light starts to glow from her touch. When it eventually fades, Udo looks at the back of his hand to find a glowing emblem. The contract was complete, and with that, Udo and Rock were officially partners. Quilt then asks him if he wanted to get his first quest. Excitedly, Udo says that he'll do anything, even any tough job. Quilt warns him, teasingly, that he shouldn't say he would do anything or he really might be ordered to do anything. Sis, what is that supposed to imply? I'm kind of scared. Udo nervously promises to be more careful in the future. Turning back the conversation back to the main topic, Quilt assigns jackalope horns for Udo's first quest. Jackalopes were also known as horned rabbits. Udo's task was to defeat 5 jackalopes and to deliver 10 horns. The best hunting ground was Furushiku Forest, which wasn't far off from the royal capital. Udo excitedly tells Rock that they were going to do their best. In a rush, Quilt throws multiple gear Udo's way. She hands him a map to the destination and a simpler map of the forest interior. She also adds a memo with important points to note and a backpack. And finally, a gift from her. Quilt pushes a sword towards him. Udo holds it in his hands, both nervous but also excited at the sight of it. Quilt explains that an adventurer should have at least one weapon. It wasn't a special sword, but it was a fairly good quality one. Udo is amazed that he was provided a sword, too, given that he didn't remember ever getting anything similar during his time from Black Thunder. Bro, the only thing you could have gotten from that place was trauma and a possible concussion at the least. He wonders to himself if that was what a normal guild felt like. Quilt apologizes to him that she could only prepare a long sword for him. Gradually, she promises that they would get him armor as well. I find it quite interesting that guilds in this world provided the adventurers with their gear. Usually, the adventurer should have their own. Quilt explains that this time around, since it was only meant to test his abilities, there was no penalty even if he failed. All that mattered was that both Udo and Rock came back safe. Udo promises that they'll come back in one piece. Udo readies himself for the trip, a cloak over his shoulders and his new sword strapped to his waist. Udo asks Rock to get in the backpack, since it would be trouble if thieves set their eyes on it again. He asks for it to bear with it until they reach the forest. With that, Udo and Rock bid Quilt goodbye. As the doors shut behind them, a silence comes over the guild hall as Quilt is left alone behind a front desk. In the next second, Quilt collapses on the counter with a heavy exhale. Completely exhausted, she pouts, saying that playing the cool big sister role wasn't easy. Personally, I think you did a splendid job either way. She rolls around, voicing aloud how nervous she was. She ponders when was the last time she talked to someone that much, but she was very glad that she was able to muster up her once-in-a-lifetime courage. Quilt didn't have anything else to give, so she gave him her spare sword. Although she wondered if it was all right, she reasons that to ordinary people, it would be an ordinary sword. While I feel like that's implying a little something more. What if the person is an ordinary Quilt? Completely spent, Quilt decides on going to sleep, still sprawled on the front desk. Meanwhile, in the Black Thunder meeting room, Hayes had gathered his members. He reminds everyone that they had managed to anger Baron MacGuffin Zol, the one who requested a rock bird egg, but Black Thunder had mistakenly given him a rock lizard egg. Hayes says that it was all Udo's fault. This guy seriously lit himself into believing it was all Udo's fault. That it's almost insane. Hayes continues that he fired Udo immediately, but that alone wouldn't restore their honor. He admits that he didn't like the Baron, but they needed to do something about their bad reputation. One of the members suggests that they need to find the egg and redeem themselves, but Hayes says that they'll also execute another plan at the same time. With a crazed look on his face, he declares that they would ambush and steal eggs found by other guilds. That way they could take it easy and others wouldn't be able to get the credit. This guy has completely lost his marbles. The other members are amazed at his thinking, which to be honest explains where Hayes gets all his pride from. Hayes orders his men to keep their eyes on other guilds because surely the Baron would make the request from other guilds as well. He tells them to report to him as soon as they find anything. Besides gaining information about that, the guild members are told to return to their regular duties and the meeting is over. However, seated in on the meeting, Hayes' girlfriend remains oddly quiet. Time passes and Udo and Rock find themselves in the forest. The young man, busy looking over the map Quilt had given him, declaring that the area would be safe enough, Udo lowers his backpack and allows Rock to come out. The little dragon runs out excitedly. Udo calls out for it to not stray too far away from him, to which Rock lets out a chirp of agreement, but soon after his little foot trips over a small jutting rock, quite funnily enough, and Rock is sent tumbling away, much to Udo's panic. Rock hits the foot of a tree roughly, and Udo runs after him. He's about to ask if he was okay, but when he arrives, Rock greets him with a happy chirp. Udo is reassured that Rock is fine, but the tree definitely was not. Udo is amazed at a dragon's physical abilities, but his thoughts are cut short when he hears rustling close by. When he leans over, he finds a small, furry creature with almost deer-like horns. It was a jackalope. Udo gets up and readies his sword to get his first jackalope. But before he can do anything, Rock is lunging for it. The jackalope leaps out of the bushes, ready for a fight. But Rock is faster and delivers a head, but so powerful that it shatters the jackalope's horns. The horned rabbit falls to the ground lifeless, and Rock chirps in victory. Udo is shocked that Rock had taken the jackalope down in a single hit. He pets Rock's head and praises him for being amazing, making the little dragon pleased. Udo couldn't believe that. A single head but had that much power. Even though Rock had just been born, its body was already really tough. Kneeling down, Udo asks if it was possible for Rock to aim at the body next time, to which Rock chirps in understanding. In another clump of bushes, they spot another furry creature with tall horns. Udo points to the jackalope and tells Rock to aim for it. Rock lunges once more, and the jackalope raises its head in alarm. The jackalope gets ready for Rock's attack, but after gathering some strength in its legs, Rock propels itself forward and flips into the air. Udo watches, it mesmerized. When Rock is close enough, it flips and lands a powerful hit on the jackalope with its tail. Tiny baby dragon just tail slapped the life out of a rabbit. The jackalope lies dead and Rock lands gracefully standing up. Udo is completely amazed. He showers Rock with praises, much to Rock's enjoyment. Udo excitedly pushes for them to take down more of the horned rabbits. Time passes, and pretty soon a few more horned rabbits are dead on the forest floor. Udo counts all 5 of them, completing the quest requirements. Suddenly, Udo notices that Rock was acting out of sorts, making sad chirps again and again. Udo begins to immediately panic, asking the baby dragon if it had gotten injured. His questions are stopped at the sound of a very loud growl coming from Rock's stomach. Bro, this is like the second time you've forgotten to feed the baby. Realizing that it was only just tired, Udo apologizes for only noticing it then. He knows that, but it wasn't like he had much food left to feed it. He suddenly remembers the jackalopes. He wonders if they were edible. Although most magical beast meats weren't suited for human tastes, if it was a dragon, maybe things would be different. Udo turns to Rock and asks if it wants to try and eat the rabbits. Opening its mouth, Rock delivers fierce flames into the pile of jackalope bodies. When the flames clear, it digs into its new meal, tail wagging in satisfaction. Udo comments that it was eating with so much gusto. Sitting on a nearby rock, he decides to take a small break too, while Udo jokes for Rock to not rush so much since no one was going to take its meal away. A shadowy figure appears from behind him. Deep behind the forest foliage, a wolf-like monster slowly creeps closer to where Udo was, who remained completely oblivious to the coming danger. Finally sensing the beast's presence, Rock chirps in alarm and readies itself for battle. Udo immediately gets up at its aggression and he turns around to see the monster, which turned out to be a black wolf. Udo questions why such a dangerous magical beast was in the forest. He's about to call to Rock for help, but Udo suddenly remembers that the wolf was able to inflict curses with its claws and fangs if they were attacked. Right then, Udo wasn't sure how it would affect Rock. He curses, realizing that he had to fight alone. Udo raises his sword, readying himself for battle. All of a sudden, the sword starts to emit a faint light. Udo is so distracted by the glowing sword that he fails to notice the wolf advancing. The wolf lunges for him, and in his panic, Udo stumbles back and falls to the ground. As a last-ditch effort, he swings his sword wildly. His slash turns the air into a solid blast of light. As it hits the wolf mid-jump, it completely slashes it clean in two. One strike and it was done. I don't know what I was thinking, but that wolf is terrifyingly huge. The wolf, now in two pieces, falls flat on the ground in front of where Udo collapsed. Immediately, the black wolf is stripped of its fur and meat, and only its bones remain. Udo sits there for a pause before he makes a dumbfounded sound in his confusion. He looks at his sword, and with another pause, decides to sheath it for the moment. Quilt had said it. Wasn't anything special, but it was a sword that could shoot slashes. Quilt, you absolute liar. OMG. His thoughts are disturbed at Rock's chirps. The baby dragon excitedly waves its arms at him. Udo squats down and pets its head, glad that it wasn't hurt. The sword had truly saved them. Udo decided, but they needed to get ready to head back. Their iron rule was to return immediately after finishing the job. It really should be your iron rule, considering how trouble just seemed to find you all the time. But before they could leave, Udo turns to the black wolf's bones and decides that they needed to collect that too. He kneels down and finds a magic stone among the bones. Magic stones were formed inside magical beasts. By having them examined at the guild or other specific places, an adventurer could prove they defeated the beast. Oh, that's super cool. It's like a little memory crystal, except it records the moment of death. LOL. With fangs, claws, magic stone in his backpack, not to mention the jackalopes. It was already full and impossible to put Rock inside. Not having any other choice, he decides to wrap Rock in his cloak and carry him. Udo asks Rock to be quiet on the carriage ride back. Time passes and they arrive in a small village. Udo waits patiently by a tree with Rock. In the distance, he sees a horse-drawn carriage heading their way. However, he suddenly stops short when he notices that the adventurers guarding the carriage were from Black Thunder. Udo sneaks by his ex-girl mates without being noticed to get to the carriage entrance. Thankfully enough, he's able to secure a seat. Suddenly, the little girl beside him asks if the creature in his arms was a lizard, surprising Udo. Looking down, he finds that the cloak had loosened and Rock's head was poking out. The little girl exclaims that she thought the little creature was cute, and Udo scrambles to explain that Rock was a lizard and his partner. He adds that she shouldn't worry because Rock didn't bite. The girl reaches over and tries to grab Rock's paws. As she pulls at him, the cloak falls even more and reveals its wings. The girl exclaims at the sight, but before anyone could hear her, Udo loudly exclaims that Rock was a rare and unusual type of lizard, much to Rock's annoyance. Suddenly, the girl's mother reprimands her and tells her to be quiet. The mother turns to Udo, apologizes for her daughter since she had fallen asleep and failed to notice that her daughter was disturbing him. Udo reassures her that it was fine, just internally grateful that their cover wasn't blown yet. Udo turns to Rock and apologizes for calling it a lizard, giving it pats to the head. There, carriage eventually stops somewhere as the horses took a break. Rock is bundled up in the cloak, fast asleep. Udo wonders if he should get some sleep too. Just then, outside the carriage, one of the Black Thunder guards turns to the forest as birds fly away and the trees shake. The horses on the carriage begin to whinny in panic, unsettled by something the coachman couldn't see. Suddenly, a large figure towering over the forest trees exits and corners the carriage. With a ferocious roar, a large man-like monster holding a gigantic club appears before them. The Black Thunder guards at the top of the carriage scurry in fear at the sight of the giant troll. They question how a nearly B-rank monster was doing on their route. The passengers in the carriage panic at the sight of the monster. Udo turns to Rock to find the dragon already awake. The Black Thunder members guarding their carriage were only dank, so there was no way just the three of them could defeat it. However, Udo thinks that maybe if he and Rock worked together with him, they'd stand a chance. Brother, you really snuck behind them earlier, and your main goal is to hide Rock from them. Why are you putting yourself out there for the world to see? Preparing themselves for a fight, Udo and Rock exit the carriage. Udo tries to talk to the members about taking down the giant troll, but before he can, even near them, screams erupt. A sword cuts the horses free from the carriage. The Black Thunder members get on the horses and run away, screaming that they weren't able to fight such a monster. The coachman begs for them to return the horses, but they gallop away. Udo stares in horror as the adventurers completely deserted them in the face of an enemy.